The kettle clicked off and the kitchen filled with the calm smell of toast and coffee. Maria plated scrambled eggs the way Daniel liked them. Soft, a little pepper, a handful of chives. Sunlight slid across the marble counter and made everything look gentler than it felt. Daniel came down the stairs with his tie loose and his phone in his hand. He smiled, the familiar quick smile that never reached both eyes anymore. "You're a saint," he said, kissing her cheek before glancing back at the screen. A buzz. Another one. He slid the phone face down beside his plate. "Back-to-back meetings today." "Me too," Maria said lightly, taking her seat across from him. "I moved the supplier call to afternoon. Haley's joining." At the sound of the name, he nodded too fast, like agreeing with himself. "Haley's been helpful. You know how she is. Organized." Organized. It was a good word for a woman who appeared everywhere. Maria turned at the office. At the elevator, lingering by Daniel's door with a stack of files, laughing softly in the hallway as if work were a private joke they shared. Maria buttered her toast, counting the motions, because counting was easier than asking. 1, 2, 3. She told herself they were just busy, all three of them, building something together. Busy people forgot eye contact. Busy people missed dinners. "How late were you last night?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. "Not that late," he said, cutting into the eggs. "Just, numbers month end, Haley stayed to finish the projections." He looked up then, ready with an explanation. "You left early. You should, actually. You worked too hard." Maria smiled. "So do you." He reached for his coffee and his phone lit up again. His eyes flicked down, quick as a blink. The contact name didn't show, only a preview. "Got the hotel?" The screen went black before the rest appeared. He lifted the cup to his lips as if nothing had happened. Maria swallowed. Coffee was suddenly bitter. On their drive downtown, the city moved in its usual slow rhythm, buses yawning at curbs, cyclists cutting clean lines between cars, a dog tugging its owner toward a park. Daniel hummed along to a song on the radio. Maria watched their joined reflections in the window, small and steady, like an old photograph. She wanted to press a finger to the glass, to smooth out the tiny crease that had appeared across the image. At the office lobby, Haley was already waiting with 2 iced coffees and a folder tucked to her side. Her hair was pulled back in a neat low ponytail. She looked bright, unruffled, exactly like someone who slept well and believed the day belonged to her. "Morning," Haley said, handing one of the drinks to Daniel. "Almond milk. No syrup." Maria blinked. She didn't know he'd switched from regular milk. Daniel took the cup with an easy grin that slid into place like it had been rehearsed. "You're the best." "Trying to keep our CEO alive," Haley teased, then turned to Maria. "I sent over the revised pitch deck. Thought you'd want to see it before the noon meeting." "Thanks," Maria said, holding the elevator button. "We'll go over it together." In the elevator's mirrored walls, Maria stood between them and watched the way space arranged itself. Daniel angled his body toward Haley without thinking. Haley angled her smile toward him with intention. Maria stood centered, a symmetrical line the reflection depended on, invisible unless removed. Work absorbed her, as it always did. The morning spilled into calls, numbers, small decisions that mattered later. If she kept moving, nothing stuck. Yet the hints kept threading through. A perfume that clung to Daniel's jacket she couldn't name. A schedule change she didn't approve. A laugh in the corridor that stopped when she opened her door. At noon, the supplier meeting began in the glass conference room. Maria led with her calm voice. The client liked calm. Daniel leaned back, watching, occasionally adding a detail that showed he knew the file. Haley clicked through the slides with practiced ease. And when the client complimented the forecast model, Daniel glanced at Haley first, not Maria. It was a small thing. Small things add up. After the meeting, the team dispersed. Maria gathered the printouts. A note was scribbled in the margin of one page, not in her handwriting. "Check with Dee about Friday. No initials, just the letter." It could mean anything. It could mean exactly what she feared. She found Daniel by the window in his office, the city unfolding behind him like an alibi. "Dinner tonight?" she asked, keeping her tone light. "We haven't in a while." He hesitated. "I might be late again. Month end, The words came smooth, but his gaze slid away before it reached hers. "Rain check?" Sure, Maria said. She could feel the yes forming in her mouth without permission. She was tired of sounding reasonable, but reason had been her armor since she was a child who solved problems with lists and clean rooms. You don't accuse without proof. You don't bleed in public. Back at her desk, she opened the revised pitch deck Haley had sent. It was good, clean, persuasive, efficient. Maria added 2 notes, made one slide stronger, and sent it back with thank you. She stared at the blinking cursor in a new email addressed to Daniel. Let's talk tonight? She deleted it. She closed her laptop at 7, then opened it again. Outside the windows, the sky lowered itself into evening. By the time she rose to leave, the office was mostly empty. In the hallway, she passed Haley's door. Light on, voices. She paused, then kept walking. The elevator arrived with a soft ding that sounded like a decision. Maria stepped in and watched the doors slide together, her reflection narrowing into a tall, quiet shape. On the street, the air was cooler. She crossed to the parking garage and told herself the knot in her chest was a lack of sleep and too much coffee. The simple cure for doubt was evidence or rest. Tonight, she would choose rest. She would go home, water the plants, eat leftover soup, and read the contract she'd been ignoring. She would believe, for a few more hours, that the life she built could hold. Her phone buzzed as she reached the car. A message from Daniel. Don't wait up. Late night, sorry. Maria typed back, okay, and pressed send. The single word looked smaller than she felt. She started the engine. The headlights washed the concrete wall, and for a beat she sat still, hands on the wheel, breathing in the steady hum. Normal, she told herself. People get busy. Colleagues get close. Marriages stretch and shrink around the calendar. She pulled out of the space and took the ramp down to the street, the city opening in front of her like a map she knew by heart. Somewhere behind her, a door closed. Somewhere above, another elevator dinged. And between those sounds, in the thin quiet, a crack widened just enough for light to pass through. The restaurant glowed in soft amber light, the kind meant to make everything seem warmer, closer. Maria arrived a little late, having stopped at home to change into a navy dress that carried quiet authority. The client, a longtime partner from Chicago, was already seated at the round table near the window. Daniel sat beside him, leaning in with practiced ease, and Haley occupied the seat on Daniel's other side, her hand resting on the table dangerously close to his. Maria smiled as she approached. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was heavier than I expected. Daniel stood to pull out her chair. Polite, almost rehearsed, but the gesture lacked the natural warmth she remembered. Haley turned with a bright smile. Maria, you look stunning tonight, Haley said, a compliment that slid out smooth but felt rehearsed, like a line meant to soften a sharper truth. Thank you, Maria replied, settling in. She reached for the menu, but kept her peripheral vision on the space between Daniel and Haley. He leaned in slightly when she spoke, nodding too quickly, the same way he did when he wanted someone to feel heard. His arm brushed hers once, then again, and Maria's fingers tightened around the edge of the menu. The waiter arrived to take drink orders. Daniel ordered wine for the table without consulting Maria, something he never used to do. Haley smiled approvingly at his choice, as if it had been discussed before. Maria told herself not to read into it. She needed to focus on the client, on business. As the evening unfolded, conversation flowed easily. They discussed quarterly numbers, market trends, and new project proposals. But every so often, Maria caught the flicker of something that didn't belong. Haley laughing a shade too long at Daniel's jokes, Daniel's hand resting on the back of Haley's chair when leaning forward to address the client. They never crossed any explicit lines in public, but the current between them was sharp enough for Maria to feel without touching. At one point, Maria excused herself to the restroom. On the way back, she passed the bar area where 2 colleagues from another department were having a drink. One of them, Greg, glanced toward the dining room and smirked. You've got some competition in there, he said half-jokingly. Maria stopped. What do you mean? Greg shrugged, the way people do when they know more than they should say. Daniel and Haley, they make a pretty good team, don't they? Always together these days. Some folks in the office are starting to wonder if it's just work. She forced a small laugh. Well, teamwork is important. Her voice was steady, but inside the words scraped against her. She walked back to the table as if she'd heard nothing, her face arranged in the calm expression she wore to board meetings. Dinner continued without incident. Daniel was charming with the client, attentive when Maria spoke, never overtly neglectful. But she noticed how his eyes shifted to Haley's when she presented an idea, how Haley's knee angled toward his under the table. Maria sipped her wine and let her gaze drift toward the window, where city lights blurred into soft gold trails. When dessert arrived, the client praised their combined efforts on a recent deal. "You've got a great team here," he said warmly. "Daniel and Haley seem to work together like they've been partners for years." Maria smiled, careful not to let the pause stretch too long. "Yes, they do work well together." She placed her fork down gently. By the time the dinner ended, her cheeks ached from holding the same polite smile. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain on pavement. Daniel walked ahead with the client, discussing follow-up meetings, while Haley lingered just enough to walk beside Maria. "That went really well," Haley said. "Daniel and I have been putting a lot into this account. I think the client trusts us." Maria glanced at her. "Yes, I'm sure he does." The car ride home was quiet. Daniel scrolled through his phone while Maria stared out the window, watching neon signs pass like unreadable pages. She thought of Greg's smirk, of the client's casual observation, of Haley's deliberate proximity. A single seed had been planted tonight, not just suspicion, but the uncomfortable awareness that maybe she had been avoiding the obvious. At home, Daniel kissed her cheek before disappearing into his study. Maria stood in the living room for a long moment, listening to the faint sound of him talking on the phone behind the closed door. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone, low, almost careful, made her chest tighten. She poured herself a glass of water, sat on the couch, and looked at the framed photo from their anniversary trip to Italy. They had been smiling in that picture, her hand in his, the sea behind them. Now, looking at it felt like remembering someone else's life. Maria took a slow breath. She wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. But the glass had begun to crack, and she knew cracks had a way of spreading when you pretended they weren't there. It was mid-morning when the email landed in Maria's inbox. She was halfway through reviewing the quarterly forecast when the notification popped up. Subject: last night. The sender was Daniel. The recipient, according to the header, was her own work address. Odd. She clicked without thinking. The message was short, but every word pressed into her like a cold blade. Couldn't stop thinking about you. Last night was everything. Let's do it again soon. Same place? No signature, no explicit name, but she didn't need one. The only you who fit was Haley. The email had been meant for her and had landed in Maria's inbox by mistake, a careless slip in the rush of morning. Her eyes read it twice before her mind caught up, before her heart decided it was real. The office around her hummed with quiet activity, the click of keyboards, the low murmur of phone calls. She felt her skin flush hot, then cold, the edges of her vision tightening. Without a word, she stood, phone in hand, and walked to the small private bathroom adjoining her office. Inside, she locked the door and leaned against it. The tile wall at her back felt steady in a way she didn't. She covered her mouth with her hand, not because anyone could hear, but because the sound she wanted to make didn't belong in the open. Her other hand held her phone, the email still glowing on the screen like a confession she hadn't asked for. Tears pressed forward, but she refused to let them spill. Not here. Not now. She took slow, deliberate breaths, the way she had before high-stakes presentations, and forced her mind to focus. If she was going to survive this, she needed control. Control over her face, her words, her next step. 5 minutes later, she emerged. Her expression was the same one she wore to board meetings, calm, unreadable. She sat back at her desk, minimized the email, and continued working as though nothing had happened. No one would suspect that her marriage had shifted in the space of a single message. The day moved in a blur. She avoided both Daniel and Haley, answering their questions with clipped politeness. At lunch, she stayed at her desk, nibbling at a salad she barely tasted, her mind replaying the words over and over. She thought of the nights Daniel had been working late, the times he'd come home smelling faintly of something floral, not her own perfume. She thought of the way Haley's eyes sometimes flicked toward her with a hint of challenge. By the time evening arrived, Maria was drained. She left the office quietly before Daniel could offer a ride home. The drive back was filled with the steady hum of tires on asphalt, the city lights a blur through the windshield. She unlocked the front door to their house and was met with silence. Hours later, she heard Daniel's car pull into the driveway. The clock read just after 10. She was in the kitchen when he walked in, loosening his tie, his smile easy but a little too slow. "Long day," he said, tossing his jacket over a chair. "Sorry I'm late." Maria nodded, studying him. The faint scent of perfume drifted from his clothes, sweet, sharp, undeniably not hers. It was the same she had caught before, only stronger now, as if it had been worn close for hours. "Did you eat?" she asked, her voice steady. "Yeah, grab something after the meeting," he said, moving toward the fridge for a drink. His casual tone might have fooled her once. Now it only sharpened the edges inside her. She leaned against the counter, watching him. There was no point asking where he'd been. Not tonight. She wasn't ready for the lie he would tell, and she wasn't ready to reveal what she knew. Instead, she let the moment pass, keeping her expression neutral. He took his drink into the living room, flicking on the TV. Maria stayed in the kitchen a little longer, her hands wrapped around a cooling mug of tea she hadn't touched. She felt like an actress holding a role in place, every muscle trained to hide the truth. Later, in bed, Daniel fell asleep quickly, his breathing evening out beside her. Maria lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The email replayed in her mind. The perfume lingered in the sheets. Something in her shifted, not broken, but rearranged into something quieter, sharper. If Daniel thought she would confront him in a burst of anger, he was wrong. She had no intention of giving him a scene to twist against her. Not yet. She would wait. She would watch. And when the time came, she would make sure the truth cost him everything he valued. For now, she turned onto her side, facing away from him, and closed her eyes. The calm she wore in the office returned, wrapping around her like armor. It was the first night she truly understood. Their marriage wasn't just cracked. It was already breaking. The shift began subtly, the way seasons changed, so gradual that if you weren't paying attention, you might think nothing was happening at all. At first, Haley started attending a few more meetings than usual, stepping in when Maria was double booked or out meeting clients. It seemed harmless, even helpful, but soon the pattern became impossible to ignore. One Tuesday morning, Maria walked into the conference room for a strategy session with a major client, only to find Haley already seated at the head of the table, laptop open, presentation ready. Daniel stood near the coffee station, chatting with two board members. "Haley offered to lead this one," he said when Maria approached. "She's been working closely on the account." Maria forced a polite smile, slipping into a chair along the side instead of her usual spot. The meeting went well enough, but she noticed how Haley subtly positioned herself as the main point of contact. The client nodded at her more, laughed at her small jokes, promised to loop her in for next steps. By the end, Maria felt like an extra in her own project. It didn't stop there. Emails began arriving addressed to Haley instead of her. Invitations to networking lunches that used to come to Maria now had Haley's name on them. She heard from her assistant that Haley had been booking client dinners on behalf of the company, with Daniel often in attendance. At first, Maria tried to confront the problem indirectly, dropping reminders about her history with certain clients, offering to co-host meetings, but each attempt was met with a warm dismissal. "You've been carrying a lot," Daniel would say. "Maybe it's time to share the load." By Friday afternoon, the situation became impossible to ignore. Daniel appeared in her office doorway, leaning casually against the frame. "Got a minute?" She set aside the contract she'd been reviewing. "Of course." He stepped inside, closing the door halfway. "Maria, you've been working nonstop for years. You built this place with me. Maybe it's time you took a real break, a month or two. Recharge. You deserve it." She blinked at him. "A break? Think about it, he continued, his tone soft but practiced. You've been under pressure, and honestly, I can see it's wearing on you. Haley's been stepping up. She can keep things running while you breathe for a while. Maria sat very still. On the surface, it sounded like concern, but beneath it, she heard the truth. He wanted her gone. Whether to clear space for Haley or simply to remove her from the picture, she couldn't tell. I don't know, she said slowly. Stepping away now would send a message to the clients. Not if we frame it right, Daniel said quickly. We'll tell them you're focusing on strategy from home. It's just, I think it would be good for you. For us. The "for us" felt like a final blow. He wasn't asking. He was giving her a script to follow. Maria felt the walls closing in. She could argue, insist on her place, but she had no hard proof of the betrayal beyond an email and a dozen small moments. Confronting him now would only lead to denial, maybe even a public scene that would damage her more than him. She needed time, and time required playing along. So she nodded. All right, a short break. Relief flickered across his face, and he smiled as if they had agreed on something mutually beneficial. Good. I'll let the board know. After he left, Maria sat alone in her office, the hum of the air conditioner loud in the quiet. Her desk, once the center of her world, felt suddenly temporary, like a hotel room you had to check out of soon. She glanced at the framed photo of her and Daniel at the company's opening day, both of them grinning under the ribbon-cutting banner. The woman in that photo had believed they were building something together. By Monday, the changes were official. Haley was listed as interim lead on multiple accounts. She was copied on emails Maria wasn't. She took lunch with Maria's oldest client and posted a smiling photo of it online, tagging Daniel. At the bottom of the post, the caption read, "Excited for the future." Maria scrolled past it, her face calm even as her stomach tightened. She was losing more than a title. She was watching her place in the company and in Daniel's life, being erased piece by piece. But if this was what they wanted, she would give it to them, for now. Let them believe she was stepping back out of weakness. Let them think they'd already won. The truth was, Maria was already making her own quiet plans. The more they underestimated her, the easier it would be to dismantle everything they'd stolen. That night, she closed her office door and stayed late, reviewing records, tracing financial trails, and making a list of people she still trusted. If Daniel wanted her out of the way, she would step aside, but only far enough to see exactly where he and Haley would fall. The first Monday of her break felt strange. Maria's calendar, once crammed with back-to-back meetings, now held empty white space. No urgent calls from Daniel. No invitations to strategy sessions. No client lunches booked under her name. The official email to staff had gone out the previous week. Maria Carter will be stepping back temporarily to focus on strategic planning and personal matters. It was polite, vague, and exactly the kind of announcement Daniel would prefer. No hint of the truth behind it. Maria didn't correct anyone. She let the whispers circulate, allowed the curious glances to fade when she didn't react. On the surface, she appeared cooperative, even relieved. In reality, every day was another step in a carefully measured plan. Her mornings began quietly. She would answer a handful of personal emails, then slip into the city to meet with old contacts. Former colleagues, clients she had brought in long before Haley's name ever appeared on the company roster. Over coffee or lunch, she listened more than she spoke. She asked about their current projects, their frustrations with the industry, and their future needs. She didn't pitch anything. She didn't need to. People remembered who had fought for their accounts, who had delivered results. By the third week, she had compiled a mental map of which clients were still loyal to her and which had been swayed by Haley's sudden charm offensive. The results were promising. Some even hinted they weren't impressed with the new dynamic at the firm. Maria made no promises, but left every meeting with a warm handshake and the quiet assurance that she was still around. Afternoons were for research. At home, she spread financial reports across her dining table, reviewing every line item she could access. She had quietly requested copies of certain records from accounting, transactions, expense reports, and budget allocations for the last year. The numbers told a subtle but unmistakable story. Excessive travel expenses logged under client development, luxury dinners charged without proper documentation, and payments to vendors she didn't recognize. She didn't confront Daniel. Not yet. Instead, she documented everything, printing copies, saving backups to a secure cloud, even mailing certain files to a trusted friend for safekeeping. If Daniel and Haley thought she had left the battlefield, they were wrong. She was simply gathering ammunition. Her evenings, once filled with tense dinners at home, were now hers alone. Sometimes she cooked something simple, sometimes she went out, rediscovering parts of the city she hadn't visited in years. She began to realize how much of her life had been organized around Daniel's schedule. Waiting for him to come home, adjusting plans when he canceled, making space for his needs before her own. Now, that space was hers, and she was learning how to fill it. Occasionally, she would run into someone from the office. At a gallery opening, a junior associate approached her with a hesitant smile. "It's not the same without you," they admitted. "Haley's different." Daniel says things are fine, but it feels like he's distracted. Maria just smiled, as if the comment were nothing more than idle workplace gossip. "Change takes time," she said, then moved on. But the words stayed with her. If cracks were showing inside the office, she wanted to know how wide they might spread. One evening, while sorting through another batch of expense reports, she paused at a line item, a 5-star resort booking in Miami, labeled as a client event. She knew for a fact no such event had taken place. She checked the dates. It was the same weekend Daniel had claimed he was in Chicago for a conference. The booking had been charged to the company card, with a receipt showing 2 guests. Maria sat back in her chair, the paper held loosely in her hand. There it was, proof she hadn't even asked for. Proof that wasn't about emotion or betrayal, but about hard facts. The kind that could ruin reputations and careers. She filed it with the others and closed her laptop. The temptation to move now, to confront, to expose was strong. But she reminded herself of the bigger picture. This wasn't about one trip or one email. This was about dismantling everything they had taken from her, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for them to stand on. As the weeks passed, Maria grew more comfortable in her quiet withdrawal. She began to enjoy walking into a cafe without checking her watch, or spending an afternoon in the library without her phone buzzing every 10 minutes. For the first time in years, she was making choices without Daniel's approval, without his shadow stretching over every decision. By the end of the month, she had something she hadn't expected: clarity. She could see exactly where her life had been shaped by his presence and where it could go without him. She could also see, with perfect precision, where his and Haley's missteps would eventually lead. They thought her absence meant surrender. In truth, it was the opposite. Maria had simply stepped back far enough to see the entire board, every piece in play, and exactly how to win. It started with a phone call on a rainy Tuesday morning. Maria was sipping coffee in her kitchen when the name Collins & Hartman Consulting flashed on her screen, a client she had managed personally for almost a decade, and one she knew Haley had been trying unsuccessfully to impress for months. "Maria," the voice on the other end greeted warmly. "We were wondering if you might have time to meet. We've been reconsidering some things." She agreed without hesitation, masking the satisfaction in her tone. 2 days later, she walked into the firm's downtown office wearing a tailored gray coat, her portfolio tucked under her arm. The meeting was cordial, filled with laughter and shared memories of past projects. She listened carefully as they explained their frustrations with recent proposals, vague timelines, lack of follow-through, too much focus on flash rather than results. Maria didn't have to ask who had handled those proposals. "I understand completely," she said, sliding a concise, data-backed plan across the table. "No jargon, no unnecessary costs, just what you need when you need it." By the end of the hour, they had agreed to bring their business back under her personal oversight. It wasn't an official defection from the company yet. On paper, the account would still be under their firm's umbrella, but Maria knew the truth. They wanted her, not Haley. The ripple effect began almost immediately. Word reached Daniel and Haley before the week was out. At the next company networking event, Maria attended, not as an official representative, but as a guest who happened to know everyone in the room. She moved through conversations with ease, recalling details about staff members' families, congratulating junior associates on recent wins, and offering quiet, genuine advice when asked. She didn't speak ill of anyone, but her presence alone seemed to remind people of a version of the company they missed. One young account manager leaned in after their chat and whispered, "It's just different without you. Things feel more performative now." Maria only smiled and told them to focus on doing good work. Haley noticed. Maria could see it in the way her eyes tracked her across the room, the faint edge to her laughter when Daniel lingered too long in conversation with Maria's old clients. Haley's usual smoothness was off, her smile a little tighter, her posture a little more defensive. Over the next week, Maria continued the same quiet pattern. She visited an industry seminar where several vendors she'd worked with in the past greeted her like an old friend. She made introductions between key people who could help each other, deliberately leaving Haley out of the loop. Every move was subtle, almost invisible if you weren't looking closely. But to those inside the circle, the message was clear. Maria was still influential, still capable, and still respected. Her second move was even quieter. She arranged a casual lunch with 3 mid-level managers from the company, people who had always been loyal to her but kept their heads down since her break. Over salads and coffee, she asked about their workloads, their department goals, and how they were adapting to recent changes. She didn't push, didn't prod, but by the time lunch ended, small cracks in the facade were showing. Delayed approvals, mixed instructions from Daniel and Haley, clients confused about points of contact. Sometimes, Maria said lightly as they stood to leave, stability is worth more than novelty. Just something to keep in mind. She didn't need to elaborate. Back at home, she updated her growing file of notes and documents. She was beginning to see the broader pattern of Daniel and Haley's management. Short-term wins masking long-term missteps, style over substance. If she timed it right, she could let their own flaws erode them from the inside, while she strengthened her own position on the outside. The following week, she received an email from Collins and Hartman, praising her initial work on their new plan and hinting they might recommend her to 2 other firms. It was exactly the kind of quiet victory she wanted, visible enough to make an impact, but not so loud that Daniel could accuse her of outright competition. At the next industry mixer, Haley approached her directly for the first time in months. "I hear Collins and Hartman are very happy with the new direction," she said, her voice light but her eyes sharp. "They are," Maria replied with a polite smile. "Sometimes the old ways still work best." For the rest of the evening, she could feel Haley's gaze on her back. The younger woman wasn't used to losing, and certainly not to Maria. But now the balance was shifting. Daniel might still believe Maria had retreated, but Haley was starting to sense the truth. This wasn't surrender. This was the first countermove, and Maria was only getting started. Maria had been collecting threads for weeks, receipts, reports, whispers, but now she began weaving them into something solid. The Miami resort booking had been her first undeniable lead, and she treated it like a single puzzle piece. To see the full picture, she needed the rest. She started with the company's travel expense logs. Through an old contact in accounting, she gained access to archived reports, supposedly for strategic review, during her break. What she found confirmed her suspicions. Multiple trips billed as client events, where no client presence could be verified, 5-star hotel stays tagged under vague project names, high-end restaurant bills for 2, dated on weekends. She didn't rush to print them all at once. Instead, she downloaded each file, saved them to an encrypted folder, and then quietly printed hard copies at a friend's office across town, somewhere Daniel's people would never think to look. She kept the originals locked in a small fireproof safe she bought in cash. The next step was vendor payments. She noticed several invoices to shell companies she didn't recognize, entities with generic names like Blue Horizon Solutions and Ardent Strategies. A quick search showed they had no proper websites, No physical addresses beyond P.O. boxes. Cross-referencing dates, she saw those payments lined up suspiciously close to Daniel and Haley's personal spending sprees. But numbers alone weren't enough. Maria knew how Daniel worked. He could charm or pressure his way out of a paper trail if the story was vague. She needed people. One afternoon, she met discreetly with Claire, a former administrative assistant who had left the company 6 months earlier. Over tea in a quiet cafe, Claire opened up. Daniel was always different when Haley was around, and I processed expense claims I knew weren't legitimate. I didn't say anything because I needed the job. Would you be willing to give a statement? Maria asked gently. Claire hesitated, then nodded. If it stays confidential until you're ready, yes. I kept copies too, just in case. That just in case turned out to be a goldmine. Claire had scanned receipts, email approvals from Daniel, and even calendar invites showing trips booked under false pretenses. Maria thanked her, sliding a business card across the table with a private number. She repeated the process with others: quiet lunches, casual drinks after work, conversations framed as catching up. From these meetings, she gathered small but potent testimonies, stories of Daniel berating junior staff behind closed doors, overriding project budgets to fund Haley's pet ideas, and forcing employees to cover for sudden absences. One young analyst admitted he had been told to adjust financial projections to make a risky investment look safe. I didn't want to lie, but Daniel made it clear my job depended on it, he confessed. Maria recorded the conversation, with his consent, on her phone. By the end of the month, her file had grown into a carefully organized archive. Each allegation was backed by at least 2 forms of proof: documents, witness accounts, or both. There were no gaps for Daniel to slip through, no loose ends Haley could exploit. She kept her demeanor calm in public, even cordial when she bumped into Haley at an industry event. Haley, for her part, seemed less steady, her laugh a touch louder, her grip on Daniel's arm more possessive. Maria could feel the unease radiating from her. It was as if Haley knew Maria was up to something, but couldn't prove it. One evening, Maria sat at her dining table with the entire collection laid out before her. Each sheet of paper, each digital file, each recorded word represented another brick in the wall she was building, a wall that, when the time came, would close in around them. She thought about confronting Daniel now, about slamming the evidence onto his desk and watching his face crumble. But that wasn't enough. She didn't just want to catch them. She wanted to dismantle the power they had taken, make their downfall so public and undeniable that no one could rewrite the story later. For that, she needed the perfect stage. She slid the files back into the safe, locked it, and exhaled slowly. The ammunition was ready. All that remained was to decide exactly when and where to fire the first shot. The ballroom shimmered under golden light, every table dressed in white linen, every glass glinting under chandeliers. It was the company's biggest night of the year. Clients, investors, and press all gathered to celebrate another year of success. Maria could hear the hum of conversation as she stood in the hallway outside, one hand resting lightly on the slim leather folder she carried. Inside that folder was the truth, cold, documented, and undeniable. Through the open doors, she spotted Daniel and Haley near the center of the room. They were exactly as she expected. Daniel in a perfectly tailored suit, Haley in a deep emerald gown that caught the light every time she turned. They stood close, laughing with a group of investors, their posture relaxed, their smiles polished. Anyone else would have thought them the perfect power couple. Maria knew better. She arrived deliberately late, letting them have their moment. The ripple her entrance caused was subtle but noticeable. Heads turning, whispers exchanged. In the months since her break, she had made few public appearances connected to the company, and her presence tonight was unexpected. She'd chosen her dress carefully, a sleek black gown with a simple diamond pendant, understated but impossible to ignore. Daniel's smile faltered for just a second when he saw her. Haley's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly before she smoothed her expression back into a gracious welcome. "Maria," Daniel said, stepping forward. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight." "I wouldn't miss it," she replied, her tone warm but firm. It's still my company too, isn't it? He chuckled, a shade too forced. Of course. Haley leaned in slightly. You look beautiful. It was the kind of compliment that sounded genuine to everyone else, but Maria heard the tightness beneath it. As the evening progressed, Maria moved through the crowd with practiced ease. She greeted clients she had personally brought in, exchanged pleasantries with board members, and even shared a laugh with vendors who had missed her steady hand. More than once, she caught Haley watching her, as if trying to gauge the purpose of her presence. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and then it was time for the annual presentation. A tradition Maria herself had started years ago, showcasing the company's achievements to the assembled guests. This year, Daniel had insisted on handling it himself. But as he approached the stage, the event coordinator handed him a note, glancing toward Maria. Daniel's jaw tightened before he turned back to the microphone. Tonight, he announced, we have a special treat. Our co-founder, Maria Carter, will be sharing a few words. A polite wave of applause rose from the crowd. Maria walked to the stage with calm, deliberate steps, her folder balanced neatly in her hands. She took the microphone, smiling at the audience, her gaze sweeping over the room before settling briefly on Daniel and Haley. It's been a remarkable year, she began. We've seen growth, innovation, and new opportunities. But we've also faced challenges. Challenges that test not only our business, but our integrity. There was a subtle shift in the air. Conversations stilled. Cameras from the press table tilted toward her. She clicked the remote in her hand, and the first slide appeared on the massive screen behind her. A simple chart of company expenditures. Transparency, she continued, isn't just a word we use in our brochures. It's the foundation of trust, and trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. The next slide appeared, expense reports with highlighted charges, luxury hotels, fine dining, unexplained vendor payments. The audience leaned in. Maria's voice remained steady, professional, as she laid out the pattern of misuse, each piece backed by receipts, dates, and confirmations. She never raised her voice, never made it personal. But she didn't need to. The facts were enough. Daniel's face had gone pale. Haley sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Around them, the murmurs grew louder. Maria ended with the final slide, the words, "Accountability builds trust," in clean, bold letters. I believe this company can recover its integrity, she said, but only if we hold ourselves and each other to the standards we promise our clients. The applause was hesitant at first, then stronger. Maria stepped down from the stage, placing the microphone back on the stand. She walked past Daniel without a glance, past Haley without a word, and returned to her seat as the next speaker fumbled to regain the crowd's attention. She didn't need to see their faces to know the damage had been done. The truth was no longer hers alone. It was now in the hands of every person in that room. And in that moment, Maria felt the quiet satisfaction of a battle turning in her favor. The applause from the previous award announcement faded as the lights dimmed again. Daniel stood at the podium, smiling with the practiced ease of a man used to controlling the room. And now, he said, let's take a look at our year in review, a celebration of the company's achievements. The big screen lit up with the first slide, a collage of client meetings, product launches, and networking events. Music swelled lightly through the speakers, warm and upbeat. Maria sat at her table, hands folded in her lap, her face a perfect mask of calm. Inside her leather folder was the final piece she had spent months assembling, one that was no longer in her hands, but in the hands of the AV technician she had quietly briefed earlier that evening. Daniel clicked the remote for the next slide. The images on the screen changed, only not to what he expected. Instead of another glossy photo of a product launch, the audience saw a grainy black and white image from a hotel lobby camera. There was Daniel, stepping out of an elevator, suit jacket slung over his shoulder. Beside him, Haley, hair loose, laughing, carrying an overnight bag. The timestamp in the corner showed 1:43 a.m. The room went utterly still. Daniel's hand froze mid-click. Ah, there seems to be. The slide changed again before he could finish. Now it was a scanned bank statement, the company's logo in the header, with highlighted transactions. Wire transfers to accounts under unfamiliar names, amounts in the thousands. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Another click. This time, a video clip. A young man in a crisp shirt, seated at a desk, speaking directly to the camera. I was instructed to alter the quarterly financial report to hide certain expenses. When I questioned it, Mr. Carter told me to adjust it or find another job. Gasps broke out. Someone from the board leaned forward sharply in their chair. Daniel took a step toward the screen, his voice tight. This isn't part of the program. But the images kept coming. Hotel receipts in Miami and Paris. Credit card charges for jewelry and luxury handbags filed under client gifts. A written statement from Claire, the former assistant, describing falsified meeting records and unauthorized use of company funds. Maria rose from her seat. The spotlight, sensing movement, found her as she approached the stage. Daniel turned, eyes wide, panic barely masked. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maria said into the microphone, her tone steady and professional, "what you've just seen is not a technical error. These are verified records, hotel security footage, financial transactions, and staff testimonies, documenting the misuse of company assets over the past year." A wave of shocked whispers swept through the tables. Cameras flashed from the press section. "I believe," Maria continued, "that our company deserves better. That our clients, our employees, and our investors deserve honesty. And honesty begins with transparency." Haley's smile was gone, her lips pressed into a thin line. She stared at the tablecloth as if she could disappear into it. Daniel stood rigid, gripping the podium so tightly his knuckles whitened. The board chair, a silver-haired woman with a reputation for being both fair and ruthless, rose from her table. "I think it's best we adjourn to a private meeting," she said coldly, her eyes fixed on Daniel. Maria stepped back from the microphone, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. She didn't need to look at Daniel or Haley again. Their silence told her everything. The perfect couple facade was shattered, and the room full of allies they'd relied on now saw them through a different lens, one of suspicion and betrayal. As she walked back to her seat, people reached out to touch her arm, to whisper their support, to nod in approval. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. Maria didn't smile, not yet. This wasn't the victory. This was the moment the walls started closing in on them. The real ending would come when those walls finished their work. The following days were a whirlwind that Maria had both anticipated and braced for. The board acted swiftly. An emergency meeting was convened within 48 hours of the gala. Investigations were launched with precision, auditors combing through records and legal advisors preparing to secure the company's reputation. Daniel and Haley became pariahs overnight. Former allies avoided their calls, their social calendars emptied, their names whispered with disdain in the hallways they once dominated. The media caught wind of the scandal. Headlines splashed across financial news sites. Top executives implicated in embezzlement scandal. Corporate betrayal rocks company name. Despite the chaos, Maria moved with deliberate calm. She received daily calls from board members and senior partners urging her to reclaim her role as co-CEO, to steer the company out of the storm she had uncovered. They promised support, resources, and a clean slate. One crisp morning, she sat across from the board chair in the glass-walled conference room. The city skyline stretched out behind them. The chairwoman's eyes held a mixture of respect and relief. "We want you back," she said simply. "The company needs you, your leadership, your vision." Maria considered the offer. Returning meant not just reclaiming power, but re-entering a world that had become a battleground of broken trust and tangled relationships. It meant facing the remnants of her past, Daniel, the betrayals, the memories, every day. With a steady voice, she replied, "Thank you. But I have learned that some victories aren't about taking back what was lost, they're about choosing what you want next." The chairwoman nodded, understanding more in that sentence than in any boardroom presentation. That afternoon, Maria cleared her office. She packed the few personal items she'd left behind, the framed photo from their opening day, a small jade figurine gifted by a client, her favorite pen set. She didn't say goodbye to the staff. Her silent exit was a statement in itself. Outside the building, the sun was beginning its slow climb, spilling golden light across the street. Maria paused at the glass doors, inhaling deeply. The weight of months of pain, strategy, and quiet determination seemed to lift with the morning air. She stepped out onto the sidewalk, the city alive with its usual rhythm, people hurrying to meetings, street vendors setting up stalls, taxis weaving through traffic. But for Maria, everything felt different. This was her moment, not just an end, but a beginning. A small smile curved her lips, one that carried no bitterness, no regret, only clarity and quiet triumph. Her revenge had been complete, not through confrontation or destruction, but through patience, grace, and unwavering resolve. As she walked away from the building, the future stretched before her, vast and uncharted. For the first time in years, it was hers alone to shape.